Hello guys, thank you for returning back to part 4 of my story time. If this is your first time joining me, then you might want to start at part 1 so that you can follow the story a little bit better and it make a bit more sense to you. But yeah, I'm just going to get straight back into it. Thank you again for joining. And occasionally I will be looking down because I've written notes so that I don't forget anything. Right, where I last left off, I've just found out that my son had to be on oxygen from air. So it was a little bit of a surprise. It was only a small amount of oxygen. I think it was something like not 0.02 or something. So it wasn't a massive amount, but seeing him go from just a feeding tube to the oxygen prongs on top of that, it was just kind of like I felt really disheartened at that point, and I just felt like what more could happen. Like I was kind of, if I'm honest, I was kind of naive to the fact that anything could happen and not every day is the same. And I just kind of expected that because he was breathing for himself, that would be it until we got home. But that wasn't the case, and it did teach me to kind of just take one day at a time. Not every day is going to be the same. So in a way, I mean, it was kind of a blessing in disguise, but I try and look at the positives to every situation. So I'll just go with that. It was a blessing in disguise. so yeah, so he was on his oxygen. I was feeling upset about it. I tried to be as positive as I could, but I did feel like it was a massive setback. I felt like he was going backwards rather than forwards. But again, that taught me that not to take things for granted. Also, not long after that, he had to have a blood transfusion. So again, I was just feeling like this is just another blow. I felt like the words transfusion for a little baby, it sounds really harsh, it sounds really serious. But after seeing the process and talking to the doctors and nurses about it, they kind of put me at ease. Whilst he was having his blood transfusion, his face did swell up a little bit and he didn't look well. He was quite lethargic and stuff, so that was a really hard time during the process. But I kind of just thought, well, I need to be strong for him. So I just kind of went into robotic mode really and just went along with it. So after I think a few days, I don't think it took him that long to get over the blood transfusion until he started being himself again. So that made me feel a little bit better. And then I remember one day I walked into the hospital and instead of him being in an incubator, he was in a heated cot. And to me, that just made me feel so much better. I felt like finally we're moving forward a little bit. Even the simple things like getting him in and out of his bed, that was a lot easier for me because I'm sure those of you that have got experience with a baby on oxygen, getting them out of the incubator isn't the easiest task. There's quite a few wires, and just the maneuvering of that made it a lot easier. Also his cares, I was able to change him properly. I felt like I had proper access to him when I was doing his cares and changing him and things like that. So it really did make a big difference. It gave me a little bit of a boost at a time when I really did need it. And again, going back to my original theory that every day is not the same, like it changed daily, weekly. So yeah, I kind of had that in my head, that mantra in my head that not every day is going to be the same. And that kind of helped me throughout that time. So not long after that, I think he was about 32. I can't remember how many weeks he was, but he was past the 32-week mark. And I was tube feeding him up until then. And then one of the nurses suggested that every time I tube feed him, I give him a little dummy so that he can suck on it, so that he can associate the sucking with the feeds, because up until then he'd only just had tube feeds, so he wasn't really used to sucking on anything. So I tried that for a while, and I think it did work a little bit. After after a while, I can't remember the exact time, but the nurse asked me if I wanted to try him like breastfeeding, and I tried a few times and he wasn't really latching on. So to me, the most important thing was as long as he was getting the milk, I didn't really mind how, because I was still expressing. So I just put my milk into a little tiny little tiny plastic container that they give you, like little bottle, and he was just drinking from there, and it was fine because he had the proper teats from, well, the premature teats, so it was easy for him to suck it. And yeah, I felt like that worked for me, so that's what I continued doing. And he got you each feed, instead of tube feeding, he was, at first it was tube feeding and bottle, and then we gradually put him into a routine where it was literally just bottle, so he was getting used to the bottle, which was good. So during this period, I actually moved back to my parents' house, so we had to transfer hospitals again for the third time. I knew this was going to be the last time, so I was happy about that, but I was still quite anxious about getting to know new nurses, because even though I was there throughout the day, these nurses were responsible for my child throughout the night, and it is, although I trusted them, it is quite a daunting experience to be with your baby all day and then leave them in someone else's care for the rest of the night. So I was a bit anxious about it, but I knew it was just part of the process, and I knew this was the last hospital that he would be in. So we got to the hospital, and again, like the last one, we were isolated for a few days, but this time it was so much different. Because he was on oxygen, the monitor just kept going off. They had to keep adjusting his oxygen levels, and it was just going off. And I just remember the sound of it was just constant beep, 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 beep. And at that stage, I was just exhausted. I was over the whole hospital thing. I just wanted to get home every day. Like this was probably 2.5 months in, maybe. And I just felt like I yearned for a day where I could just be in my pajamas all day. But obviously, with a baby in hospital, you have to kind of put a face on, and you have to be out and about, seeing people every day. And I just wanted a break from it. I was just so fed up, but I had to keep saying to myself that this is the last stage of the hurdle. This is the last hurdle, like, of the hospital journey. So I've got this far, so I have to continue trying to be as positive as I possibly can. So after a few days and everything was all right, we were back in the normal ward with parents and other babies. So that made me feel a lot better. And he was doing well. Like, he was still on the oxygen, but he was he was getting, I can't remember the size, but he was like, I think he came out of hospital about maybe just under £5. So he was £4 and something at the time, and so he was getting bigger. He was learning with his bottle feeding. He was doing a lot better. He was drinking a lot more, and yeah, I was really happy and content at that stage. Then one of the nurses came up to me one day, and she said to me that we can start discussing like discharge plans. And at that point, I was so nervous. I was just thinking, I was nervous, and I was kind of like not happy about the fact that he had to come out of hospital with oxygen. The thought of it just made, I was just, because I had a few friends that had babies that were premature throughout this process, and their babies didn't need oxygen. So I was kind of like the only one of the only ones. And I felt like, why can't he stay in hospital until the oxygen comes off? I just was a bit nervous about the whole oxygen thing. I would have preferred him to come out of hospital without the oxygen. So what I did is I did some research, and I realised it is quite a common thing for premature babies to come out of hospital with oxygen. So it did kind of put me a little bit more at ease. I learned like how to put the oxygen on, like how to adjust the levels and all that kind of thing. So I did feel a little bit better about the situation. It did take me about a week to come round to the idea though. But then I started getting excited about him coming home and preparing for him and everything. So moving forward to the night before I took him home, so the plan was for me to stay over in the hospital for a night, and then he come home with me the next day. And I must say, I was excited that night, but I feel like that was definitely a wake up call because I feel like there was a massive difference between feeding him all day, going home, getting a full night's sleep, and then going back to him in the morning than being with him all night. I didn't know him at night, and that was something I had to learn. But I feel like because I was there all day doing all the feeds, being really involved, that really did help prepare me the best way I could be prepared for his arrival at home, basically. And I just remember that night, I remember saying to one of the nurses, I think I was like on my third feed, getting like the third feed ready throughout the night. And I was just like, this reality has definitely hit now. That was the first time I actually felt like I hate to use this word, but like normal mum. Like it was definitely a shock to the system. And yeah, a brilliant experience though, because it was something that I felt like I should have experienced from day one anyway. But yeah, I'm going to leave part 4 right here. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe if you like what you hear. And if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to ask me. Thank you so much for listening again. Please take care. See you later. Bye.